With the most important election of our lifetimes around the corner, I finally feel compelled to bring my old YouTube channel out of its ancient slumber, to offer some of my thoughts on current events. Yes, this is going to be yet another video about Donald Trump, and as someone who is sick to death of hearing about Donald Trump, I find it regrettable that this is what spurred me back to making YouTube videos. But fear not, you won't find any Trump derangement syndrome here, and that's actually kind of what I wanted to talk about today. Ever since I uploaded my original video on Oswald Spengler's philosophy of history way back in 2019, I have gotten a steady stream of negative comments about some of the things I said in that video that continue to this very day. Right now, I want to focus on just one of these issues, what I said about Donald Trump and how he fits into Spengler's idea of Caesarism. For a quick refresher, here is exactly what I said about Trump in that video. The presidency of Donald Trump in the US is significant. While not a true Caesar, he is an international embarrassment for the US, and his army of fanatical followers show that were a true Caesar to appear in the West, he would have little trouble finding supporters to attack the system and gain power. The negative comments I've gotten on this have been your standard "orange man bad" type stuff. I realize now that I should have phrased what I said back then differently. For the record, I don't think Trump is bad or even good. I don't think the study of meta-history in the vein of Spengler should contain any such value judgments anyway. Let's just say that I see him as a sign of the times, as the type of man that should be appearing at this moment in history, according to Spengler's theory of history. And yes, I am talking about Caesarism. First off, let's refresh ourselves on Caesarism in Spengler's philosophy of history. In The Decline of the West, Spengler's main idea is that history is not linear and that each historical civilization has a definite and predictable lifespan wherein it is born, matures, and blossoms like a flower, and then dies. All civilizations go through more or less the same stages of growth and decay, which are predetermined by the nature of their own existence. Spengler likened these stages to the seasons of the year, which run parallel in the life cycles of all civilizations. Such parallelisms he said to be contemporaneous with each other. A quick morphology of the European American and Greco-Roman civilizations would see springtime in the contemporaneous medieval and Homeric eras, summertime in the Baroque and Classical eras, and autumn in the Victorian and Hellenistic eras. Winter is still yet to come for our civilization, but Spengler saw the Roman Imperium as the winter of classical antiquity. A fundamental characteristic of winter is the political and psychological phenomenon of Caesarism. It appears first during autumn, gradually, stealthily, and eventually comes to govern the entire psychology of the elderly civilization. It's not so much a political philosophy as it is a political reality. When every single nation and people in the cultural sphere of an old civilization become subsumed under one enormous universal empire headed by a single autocrat who rules for life with absolute power, the transition into the final stage is complete. It's not brought on by any one event or any individual politician. Conventional historiography links causes with effects like a science, but Spengler despised this method of doing history. For Spengler, to say that an event is the cause of anything in history is the same as saying the leaf is the cause of the flower. For Spengler, the Geist defines events. The appearance of a thing in history is deeply symbolic to the particular time and place in which it appears. For example, Gothic cathedrals were constructed in the Middle Ages because the medieval worldview required the architectural symbolism of Gothic cathedrals. There is a time and a place for everything, and a good historian should know what was and what wasn't symbolically possible in any given historical period. A brief glance at Spengler's historical timeline would place our modern world wars as occurring contemporaneously as the Punic Wars in Roman history. About a century on, this would put us right now in about the same situation as the Roman Republic circa 100 BC, just before the Social War. I am of course very confident that Spengler was correct in this assessment, and that the rest of our 21st century will play out more or less similarly to the 1st century BC in the Roman world. Let's return now to Trump. Is Trump a Caesar? In my original video I said no, he is not a true Caesar. I want to revise not just that statement but the whole idea. Pointing to a single man and saying he's a Caesar is not useful. What is useful is pointing to individuals who represent Caesarism as a cultural phenomenon. For Spengler, the classic example during his time was Cecil Rhodes, a very wealthy man who ruled over his own private colonial empire in British Africa. Caesarist men like Cecil Rhodes are able to wield so much influence not just through their enormous wealth but also through their legions of loyal followers that they are effectively above the law. We're all very aware of Trump's legal battles, how many times he's been convicted, indicted, impeached, whatever, and yet not only is he still running for the office of most powerful man on earth, but he has a very good chance to win. From a meta-historical perspective, yes, Trump is a fairly perfect example of the growing phenomenon of Caesarism in our old, beleaguered civilization. You see, Spengler's philosophy of history is not just a philosophy of history, but a philosophy of politics. While I am much more interested in the theoretical aspect of Spengler's ideas, he had intended his work to be used, something like a political handbook, or a political doorstopper in this case. Just as a historian should know what was and wasn't possible in history, a politician should know what is and isn't possible in the present day. This is a bit like the Overton window. Think of a man like Bismarck, who carefully navigated the boundaries of possibility of a Europe awash with conservative monarchies wary of German unification to create one of the most powerful empires of the modern period. Bismarck's unique understanding of the zeitgeist is why he is remembered as a master of 19th century realpolitik. Similarly, Trump knows what is possible for an American leader right now at this very point in time. Trump's great skill is not in politics or foreign policy as was Bismarck's, but in the one thing that is of paramount importance in this specific moment of history: social media. Since the early 20th century, American presidents have been using mass media to increase engagement with voters, but Trump is the first to use it to basically make the entire American political system about him. To be as controversial as possible, to be constantly seen, to have his name on the lips of every single person across the globe, that is Trump's approach. Such tactics would not have been successful 40 years ago, and have only become enabled in the internet age. Trump knows exactly this, and it's why he's so good at it. This is what makes him the man of the hour. During the imperial age, the personality and capability of the emperor is all that really matters. Power centers wholly on the emperor because the masses allow it. Policy and legislation are no longer important. People live for themselves and for what the emperor can promise them. Spengler describes the chronic political apathy of the early Roman Empire here. Already, by Caesar's time, reputable people had almost ceased to take part in the elections. It embittered the life of the great Tiberius that the most capable men of his time held aloof from politics, and Nero could not even by threats compel the Equites to come to Rome in order to exercise their rights. This is the end of the great politics. Trump, however, is still essentially an ideologue. He's an outsider who originally ran on an anti-establishment platform of draining the swamp. Ironically, the great age of political apathy is preceded by an episode of highly ideological politics. This tragically occurs at the very moment that the nucleating empire becomes certain of the invincibility of its hegemony. The result is confusion and disorder in the heartland, while foreign enemies on the fringes of the empire use the chaos as an opportunity to strike. This is what I meant when I originally described Trump and his silly antics as an embarrassment. We live in the age of embarrassment, the same age in Rome that stretched from the assassination of the Gracchi brothers to the dictatorship of Cornelius Sulla. After Sulla, the only thing that mattered from that point on was naked power. But even during our age of embarrassment, our age of hubris, the age in which more young people showed up for an election than any other generation in modern history, a deep sense of generalized apathy already lurks beneath the surface. One of the most significant social issues of our day is the fact that young men have been checking out of society for quite a while now, retreating into online micro-communities based on hobbies and lifestyles, where they can get the emotional reassurance and identity validation that they feel they can't get in the offline world. Social media sites like TikTok, Discord, Reddit, X, and even 4chan are the vehicles by which these communities can simply be together, where generally speaking, the only rules are be nice and no politics. When they speak, it's only ever in terms of we and never I. There is a certain religious quality to such communities, how they organize themselves around patron saints, whose religious authority is more important than any mere individual's inner conscience. I am of course talking about the so-called influencers. Social media is deceptive in its apparent innocence. Even as you subscribe to a channel here on YouTube, you lose your individual identity. You voluntarily become a statistic, a follower of a surrogate friend that will never even know that you exist. It may seem benign and inconsequential, but this is exactly how Caesarism appears and grows stealthily. The following is a quote from Amaury de Riencourt's book on Caesarism. Caesarism is not dictatorship, not the result of one man's overriding ambition, not a brutal seizure of power through revolution. It is not based on a specific doctrine or philosophy. It is essentially pragmatic and untheoretical. It is a slow, often century-old, unconscious development that ends in a voluntary surrender of a free people escaping from freedom to one autocratic master. The political configuration of tomorrow will center on the influencer, by which I mean the Caesar. In contrast to the idea that this is the most important election of our lifetimes, I don't think it matters at all if Trump wins or loses this election. Trump is still a 20th century politician. He might throw another tantrum if he loses, but he'll back down just like last time. As I have said, he represents Caesarism as a historical trend and its growing influence in every aspect of our lives. What is so interesting about Trump is that his rise to power foreshadows the rest of this century. Mark my words, whoever comes after Trump will be much worse than he is. Trump is often called a fascist. Actually, the essayist John J. Riley, who wrote a lot about Spengler and his ideas, once referred to Caesarism as realistic fascism. The regime of Augustus could definitely be called realistic fascism. It's not born out of ideology and romanticism like the fascism of the 20th century, but out of a very real desire to quell and control the nightmarish chaos of the final decades of modernity. As scholars of meta-history, all we can do is observe it and document it as it happens.